Hi guys, Literary Prepper back again. Just wanted to sort of talk about something that came up in conversation yesterday with a few of my delightful little Facebook friends. So there's an election coming up in a couple of months because our government is fabulous. We don't actually have a date set yet, I don't believe, but people have already started slinging the political bullshit, as it were. So, discussion about party policies and, who's a crappy party and who's a brilliant party and, why we should not vote for everyone. Anywho. So, the subject was brought up with a policy that the Greens have. Apparently, the delightful little buggers are trying to bring death taxes back because they think that that's a fair way to, tax people who have money and, do God knows what with it. I don't like the Greens. I'm just putting that out there as a disclaimer. So if you're a Green supporter, you're probably not going to like what I'm about to say. But the people that I was having this discussion with were saying, oh, it's not such a bad thing because the death taxes that they're talking about would only affect people who have assets somewhere around the $10 million mark. And these people are not old enough to remember when death taxes were actually around. Their parents probably don't sort of talk about death taxes because when their parents were younger it was abolished. So we're talking about going back probably 2 or 3 generations before you actually get people that these people would have contact with that would remember how devastating death taxes were to their families. So just to give you a little bit of a background on the abolition of death taxes in Australia for those who aren't familiar with the issue. So in the 1960s, the Queensland government decided that they needed to populate Queensland because, basically everyone wants to live in Melbourne and Sydney, and they thought a really novel way of, sort of trying to entice people into the state would be to abolish death taxes. So they did that. And then there's a whole bunch of people that, sort of thought, well, hang on a second, I'm, getting toward retirement age or, having to sort of think ahead toward that sort of thing. I don't like the idea of, having to work hard all my life and save and invest and be careful and do all of the right things just so that the government can take a fair chunk, when I eventually sort of shuffle off. So, that sort of, put 2 and 2 together, warmer climate, no death taxes, let's move on to Queensland. And that's how Queensland sort of started building up their population. So, particularly in the southeast corner, a lot of the architecture that you'll see is very typical of 60s, 70s architecture because that was when a lot of people moved into the area. So, very soon after, other states followed suit because they saw how popular it was. So that, as I said, hasn't really been an issue for, not for my parents, not for my grandparents. So as far as having to deal with that sort of thing goes, because, they were able to, pass on their assets to whoever they decided they wanted their stuff to go to. Now, to say that a tax is only going to affect those who have money and we're going to target the rich people, I think is the most naive statement that anyone can ever come out with. Remember that, income tax was only supposed to affect rich people when it was first introduced. And, it's really, you can't turn around and say that you're only going to, target one particular demographic. So if they introduce this thing, this is like, slippery slope after a bloody mudslide or whatever. Like, it's not going to stop at people that have, assets in excess of, say, 10 million. The way that political, sort of back and forth generally goes before something becomes policy is they'll come out with something and they'll say, okay, we want, let's say, death taxes to affect people that have assets in excess of $10 million. And then they'll turn around and say, well, if you're going to introduce that particular policy, then it's not really fair that you're only taxing those people. So how about we bring it down and we say that anyone with assets over, say, $1 million is going to get taxed. And the general populace sort of sit back and they think, oh yeah, $1 million, that sounds like a lot of money. Except when you start looking at houses around the area that we live in, and houses around, most sort of relatively populated areas around the country. I mean, you can still get places way out west where no one wants to live, where you can buy a house for under $100,000. But around here, most houses are worth between $500,000 and, say, $700,000 if you're, looking at something that's relatively new. And that's just for an average family home today. So if you account for inflation, as long as there's not like a massive, housing crash or something like that, then by the time, my generation get to the stage where, they're looking at passing it on to, whatever beneficiaries they decide to have, kids, nephews, some obscure cat sanctuary, their assets are going to be well and truly over that $1 million threshold. I mean, I think I worked it out. If inflation continues, then my son will be paying something like $20-something for a beer when he turns 18. You almost pay that when you go into the city today. But my point is that you can't sort of start playing with these really dangerous policies and expect that they're not going to affect everyone. And that's one thing that really, really disappoints me with the education system, is that there are so many history teachers who teach by an out-of-date textbook. It's disgusting. You are lazy if you do that. Lazy. You need to start educating kids as parents, teachers, wider community, anyone who comes into contact with younger people. You need to start talking to them about the effects that politics have. You can't be one of these people like my mother who doesn't want to scare people, so avoids talking about the less sort of scary bits and pieces to do with the world and politics in general. If we don't talk about it, then it leaves the door wide open for these dangerous policies to either come back or be introduced fresh off the bat. And that's something that we really can't afford. There are so many things at the moment that need to be adjusted because they've been neglected or they just have not been addressed to begin with. And it involves a big discussion about, things that have happened in the past, why certain things were gotten rid of, why certain things have never been introduced, and the potential knock-on effects of policies that are going to be introduced in the future. Because this whole thing of let's just make policies that make people feel good so they can skip around the damn maypole and hold hands and sing Kumbaya, that is very, very, very short-sighted. And we, at the moment, live in a relatively prosperous, democratic, capitalist society. And these socialist policies that are coming in, they're not going to do anybody any good. I often read, I feel like doing a Facebook cull with some of my friends, I really do. Often read people going on these rants on Facebook where they're like, oh, people like the Bill Gates of the world or the Warren Buffetts of the world, they, don't deserve to have the money and the assets that they have because it's not fair to everybody else who has less. Okay, so does that mean that you now disincentivize people to work hard? If you come up with an idea and you happen to be lucky enough that that gets off the ground and you work your little bum off to make sure that that idea becomes profitable, why is it that, you should be punished for that? If you start thinking along those lines, then you will lose your innovators, you will lose your hard workers, you will lose anyone who has any ounce of dedication, because they will look at that and they'll go, why should I? If you're, say, somebody like Bill Gates, and you come up with this potential idea and you have the foresight to see where it could potentially go, you may as well stay in your mum's garage and just flip burgers on the weekend, because, I wouldn't want to be working and sacrificing and, doing all of the right things so that I can give my money away to somebody else. Unless, it's what you want to do, but that's a personal choice, not an obligation. I just think a lot of these policies are really, really short-sighted, and death taxes are so not the way to raise money in this day and age. So, don't support these kinds of policies when people start talking about them. Do a little bit of background research and find out why things have been, shelved or replaced with different policies in the past, because, we can't afford to stuff up on that scale. Because, let's say it's not an old person. Let's say that, you're looking at a couple with kids who have, a house that's, in a particular sort of suburb. And when you bought that house, it might have been a reasonable price. But if there's, a real estate boom in that area, and all of a sudden your very modest family home skyrockets in value, if one person dies and then the other person, has to pay death taxes, they lose their family home. And all of a sudden you're having to deal with, having to find somewhere new, sell your family home, pay all of these taxes that are coming in, dealing with the death of a loved one, organizing a funeral, trying to, console the rest of your family. Don't do it. Just don't do it. So yeah, that's my political rant for the day. Just do not support these kinds of policies. Do not support death taxes. And for the love of God, by all means, vote independent and find someone who is, maybe not a part of a major party, who thinks along the same lines that you do. But do not vote for the Greens, because they're a dangerous, dangerous party. They're not upfront with their policies, and they do not think long term about the potential knock-on effects of anything they want to introduce. So yeah, that's my rant for the day, and I'll talk to you guys later.